Homelander is the leader of the Seven, a powerful group of superheroes owned and managed by the company Vought International. At first glance, the Seven look commanding and virtuous, front and center of a public-facing mission to defend America against all threats. At the peak of the Seven's popularity, the most recognized and celebrated member of the team is Homelander. With chiseled features, a glowing smile, and a patriotic superhero suit, which includes a US flag for a cape, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired hero is held by many to be the perfect symbol of duty, excellence, and traditional values. He has the best of powers to boot. Much like a certain Kryptonian hero, Homelander has heat rays, super strength, durability, flight, and X-ray vision. Impervious to all known threats, Homelander can withstand extreme temperatures and sustain disastrous attacks, and no weapon has been identified that can injure him. Creation of Homelander. Homelander was born in the spring of 1981 from the DNA of Soldier Boy, America's first and greatest superhero. Born with unbelievable powers, he was raised in a lab and was surrounded by doctors like Jonah Vogelbaum, who named him John. Vogelbaum remarked that John was a sweet child in his early days between age 5 or 6 who'd cuddled up to him and loved hearing stories and loved the idea of the woods manifesting destiny. However, needing John to become the strongest man in the world came at the cost of him turning violent, aggressive, wrathful, and downright hateful. Throughout his childhood, John was put through painful and traumatic physical experiments and surgeries to test the true limits of his abilities. Some of these tests included having his hand forced into a furnace, being boiled alive, and being forced to fight strength-enhanced Vought guards. He was also put under long, strict, and tedious mental conditioning and was forced to spend hours sitting in front of a projector that displayed images that were chosen to mold his personality into becoming patriotic, all-American, and turn him into a symbol of the nation itself. Growing up, Homelander was a fan of Soldier Boy and watched all of his movies hundreds of times. Homelander respected Soldier Boy for being the only other super in existence who was nearly as strong as him and idolized the latter as his hero, not knowing at the time that they were father and son. Why Homelander is the strongest superhero? So basically, Homelander was born better than every other supe. We find out that Homelander was engineered to be the strongest superhero. Vought took the strongest super ever, who was Soldier Boy, and used his sperm, which was already carrying whatever mutation Compound V did to him, to create a new superhero. They likely also used the womb of a female supe, which likely ended up giving him even more Compound V concentration. And once that baby was born, they then pumped it full of even more Compound V, creating the first genetically superior supe. So, Homelander is quite literally built better than all the other supes. His body was bred from the two most Compound V infused humans to give him an edge on how much Compound V he could handle. And then Vought just pumped his embryo full of V serum. The difference between Homelander and the other supers is like the difference between your average Joe and an Olympic athlete. Sure, you can get some pretty strong or fast average people, but then there are those athlete families who have had kids specifically with other Olympic athletes to create the most structurally gifted kids. Homelander was created by Vought to become the strongest supe, and his superior genetics along with Compound V just made it easier for him to claim the top spot in the superhero world. What turned him into a psychopath? One of the founding scientists at Vought, Dr. Jonah Vogelbaum, oversaw the creation, training, and indoctrination of Homelander, who he called John. As a test subject injected with the chemical agent, Homelander was primarily raised in an experimental lab room and under constant observation. Even as a baby, Homelander was deprived of the comforts of physical affection, stimulating toys, and enriching environments that would normally have fostered his psychosocial development. Vogelbaum was somewhat of a father figure to Homelander, offering smiles and affirming gestures through a small window of the lab room, but never offering him unconditional love in the form of genuine acceptance, warm and caressing contact, and one-on-one time that isn't based in evaluation. In truth, Homelander's lethal and uncontrolled powers kept the researchers detached and distant. Unintentionally, these protocols had some anti-socializing effects on Homelander. Throughout his youth, Homelander spent most of his critical waking hours performing tasks, taking endurance tests, and being stretched to his limits by zealous experimenters. During this time, Homelander did receive attention from his surrogate caregivers, but only through the narrow and relentless expectation to perform. The pressure created a transactional relational schema for Homelander. When he masters his powers, he receives affirming words and time with his caregivers. But when he fails, he undergoes more torturous tests and criticism. Homelander later admits that he often felt alone and scared as he learned to navigate his inhuman abilities. He was often overwhelmed with emotions, battling fear, insecurity, and hopelessness, but was never taught how to regulate them. Vought scientists should have known that extreme isolation, lack of physical contact, and a scarcity of social interaction would have deleterious effects on Homelander's emotional development. Well-established science shows that babies can miss out on critical learning stages of development due to absent caregivers. Early life deprivation can have long-lasting, irreparable effects on young brains. Even lab studies on mice show that being raised in impoverished environments causes deficits in intelligence, curiosity, and personalities. Mice need an abundance of toys, tunnels, and hideouts in their environments, but humans need a more complex version of activity, stimulation, and exploration. Brains in richer, more stimulating environments have higher rates of neuron growth, leading to increased brain activity and a flourishing mind. Like a mouse in an impoverished cage, Homelander's emotional, social, and intellectual potentials were stunted. In addition to sensory and intellectual stimulation, children need social bonds. But Homelander's caregivers were fixated on supernatural progression, not empathy building. He was forced to endure torture, withstand blazing fires, survive for hours underwater, and overcome violent attacks. Aside from a soft blue blanket he clung to, Homelander couldn't find solace or ease his pains. After repetitive tests of endurance and torture, he wasn't soothed, healed, or even embraced. Homelander missed out on the normal everyday stuff of childhood. Youth often learn about core values, worldviews, and beliefs from their parents. In a way, Homelander was in charge of his own upbringing, learning through self-discovery. He was taught that he was a weapon, a tool. He was not designed for love, nurturing, or companionship. Compound V may have led Homelander down a path toward physical indestructibility, but the emotional abuse set him on a path towards psychological pruning. For years, Homelander's physical and emotional needs were not met. Verbal communication was not used to foster belongingness, comfort, and self-esteem. Physical affection was not used to promote security and safety. What he needed most, alongside proper guidance, limits, and consequences, was unconditional love. Not love for what he could do, but for who he is. How strong is his heat vision? Homelander is capable of projecting highly concentrated beams of energy from his eyes. These blasts of energy are so powerful that they can cut through almost any metal. However, Homelander is most notable for using his optical beams on people, melting flesh and bone with ease and causing people to burst into gore. His heat vision can also likely cut through most supes, shown in Homelander's hesitation to use them on Stormfront. He is also able to control the intensity of the beams, as shown when he used his heat vision to warm up a bottle of Stillwell's breast milk without damaging the bottle. When confronted by Billy Butcher and Soldier Boy, he struck Butcher's chest with his optic beams, but rather than bisecting Butcher or even burning him, the energy beams caused Butcher to fly backwards and into a wall, leaving him momentarily stunned by the impact, due to Butcher having given himself temporary superhuman powers via Compound V24. This probably means that against supes of high durability such as Butcher and Queen Maeve, Homelander's blasts do not seem to have a significant impact. But if it was Kimiko or Huey in Butcher's place, it's very much possible that they would probably be dead by now. Homelander's X-ray vision. Homelander can see through any solid object or surface, with the exception of objects and surfaces that are lined with zinc, implying that he only has low-energy photon X-ray vision. He X-rayed Stan Edgar, stating that he was very close to a coronary because his blood was like engine oil. Stillwell acknowledged that he used his X-ray vision to spy on her, and Homelander can also zoom in on things, allowing him to see distant objects, people, and surroundings. When stalking Madeline Stillwell, he used his X-ray vision to see through a wall and then zoomed in on her slowly to get a closer look. Homelander's abnormal senses. Homelander possesses tremendous auditory awareness, allowing him to detect sounds from miles away. He can also use this power to detect a person's heartbeat and blood pressure, and can tell when they are excited or anxious. His hearing also allows him to tell when someone is lying. Even other Supes are well aware of this ability, and Starlight even told Stan Edgar that he could hear him through the wall. Along with hearing, Homelander also possesses an amazing olfactory sense. For both Huey and Starlight, he was able to tell they were nervous by smelling that their adrenaline had increased. He can use his sense of smell to locate explosives. He was also able to smell Billy Butcher's scent on Queen Maeve, thus letting him know they had slept together. Homelander's terrible relationships. Talking about Queen Maeve and Stillwell, Homelander had a romantic relationship with both of them, but it was not what it looked like on the surface. So, Homelander can be charming and make favorable first impressions. These attributes can attract partners and friends initially, but their superficiality and self-absorption lead to troubled relationships. Madeline Stillwell, the director of hero management at Vought, is one of the first to recognize that under Homelander's sturdy exterior is an impressionable interior. Seizing the opportunity, she begins grooming him to advance Vaught's agenda. She sees him as a tool she can crank for the betterment of the company. In his early days at Vought, Homelander struggled to sustain the feeling of importance. When other Supes like Black Noir were celebrated, Homelander was flooded with feelings of neglect and invisibility. During this time, Stillwell manages to exploit Homelander's weakness, his craving for closeness and comfort. She uses touch to awaken this unmet need, and the feelings it brings up for him are confusing but satisfying nonetheless. Her sweet talk and stroking hit the right spot for him, appealing to his oversimplified moral schema that when he follows orders, he is rewarded. He trusts her as anyone would a caregiver, and he begins to commingle the concepts of mother and lover. But the constant cycle of affection giving, control, and dehumanization reaches a boiling point. Homelander is gutted to learn that Becca and his child are alive, and that Stillwell participated in keeping him away from them. So, Homelander kills Stillwell. So killing Stillwell was a violent and impulsive end to their troubled relationship. Homelander extinguishes the harm done by her, but he remains irreparable. As a way to fill the void, Homelander begins setting up sessions with Doppelganger, a shape-shifting super who can do a perfect impersonation of Stillwell, down to the protective, whispering assurances and sensual touches. Much like therapy, these meetings with a fake Stillwell restore Homelander's self-confidence and help him process difficult emotions. Hidden away in a cabin, unseen by the public eye, and distant from the pressures of Vought, this new surrogate brings Homelander both physical and emotional soothing. In one desperate visit to the cabin, the farce isn't as curative as it's been before, and Doppelganger notices Homelander's disappointment. Intuitively, Doppelganger morphs into a copy of Homelander, still wearing Stillwell's black lingerie and heels. He kneels to perform a sexual act, but Homelander slowly grips him by the neck. As he looks at himself, Homelander says, with full conviction, "I don't need anyone to love me," and snaps his look-alike's neck. Killing Doppelganger speaks to Homelander's impulsivity and dysregulation, as he'd rather destroy another person than let him see the emptiness inside of him. But strangling an exact copy of himself also represents his deep self-hatred and thwarted belongingness. It's a rageful and violent act toward the self, a type of pseudo-suicide that allows him to feel what it would be like to end his existence and therefore permanently escape the relentless turmoil. If there is anyone who understands Homelander's struggle, it is Queen Maeve, a Supe who is nearly as powerful and adored by the public for her Wonder Woman-like warrior image. The two have dated, and at times Maeve notices the burden of Homelander's desire to be loved by the world. Homelander's display of insecurities and instability is similar to people with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by major mood shifts, impulsivity, and an unstable self-image. Within him is a wild storm of depression, anxiety, and irritability as he is desperately, constantly trying to keep his painful feelings of himself bottled up. Like others with BPD, Homelander responds to emotional overload by transferring the chaos to other people with gaslighting, blaming, and violence. When Maeve has a close bond with any other person, Homelander sabotages the relationship. He strikes before he is replaced, undermined, or abandoned. This explains Homelander's mind and how he is physically indestructible, but is mentally unstable and weak. Experiments done on Homelander in comics. In the comics, Homelander is given a Superman-like origin story in that he appeared out of nowhere and landed on Earth as a baby. His strength was such that he even created a crater on the surface in the process. He is a benevolent alien who decides to stay on and help mankind. The truth is far from the alien origin story. Homelander, in comics and on the show, was brought up in a laboratory like a test subject and hardly given any affection as a child. In the source material, it was also mentioned that he killed the entire team of doctors and nurses that was present inside the hospital room at the time of his birth. Homelander's mother also died on the table, giving birth to him. She had mental health problems, which Vought had taken advantage of and made her the sacrificial lamb for their little experiment. The manner of his birth is repeated another time when his clone son is born to Becca Butcher. The baby killed Becca and was floating in the air above the bed when Billy Butcher came across him and instantly killed him off. To say that Homelander had an unusual childhood would be an understatement. He was so feared, and everyone was so terrified of how a childish tantrum might end up with their death that he was hidden away in a silo in South Dakota and chained to a nuclear bomb to make sure he wouldn't do anything untoward. The one on the show was kept in a containment chamber, but he didn't have anything as drastic as that happened to him. In the source material, just like Black Noir was made from Homelander's genetic material, so was Homelander himself, crafted from taking the DNA of the Nazi Super Stormfront. Stormfront himself was an experiment, born from Hitler's desire to have a super soldier on his side. He was injected with Compound V, made to fight in the war, and then smuggled off to America, where his genetic material was stored in preparation for future soups. Show Stormfront doesn't quite say there's a direct link between them, but she does mention that Homelander was the perfect specimen, and just the kind of man she and her husband, Old Man Vought, had envisioned would carry Compound V in his veins. Homelander's death in the comics. Just like the show, Homelander's mind is unstable in the comic books, but it gets worse as the series comes to an end. Homelander loses his mind because of Billy Butcher, and Vought was also involved in it, and he tries to take over the United States with the help of some other soups. I think The Boys TV show can also take similar turn in the near future, but it will probably take some time. In the comic books, Homelander kills the President of the United States in front of Billy Butcher. Soon, Black Noir joins the proceedings and reveals his true identity as a clone of Homelander, who was created solely as a countermeasure to take out the overpowered superhero in case they needed to put him down. It's also revealed that Black Noir was responsible for the assault on Butcher's wife and all the other crimes for which Homelander was blamed. Homelander has an existential crisis upon learning about his clone and immediately re-examines all of his decisions. He goes insane and attacks an unmasked Black Noir as the White House is lasered to pieces by the two heroes fighting. As a clone of Homelander, Noir proves himself to be an extremely strong opponent, and after struggling against each other, Noir takes down Homelander for good. After successfully killing Homelander, Black Noir, with his intestines bursting out of his stomach, emerges from the White House with Homelander's corpse in his hands. Butcher doesn't waste a second and jumps on a turret and fires a flurry of bullets at him. Noir barely survives, and that's when Butcher takes a crowbar, puts it through Noir's eye, and pops off the top of his skull. He proceeds to rip his brain out with his hands and squish it. To be honest, Black Noir's death is even gnarlier than it sounds. So, Homelander getting blinded by his own rage and being defeated by literally the being created to take him out is a somewhat fitting ending for the powerful soup. While the reveal that Black Noir was responsible for some of the most gruesome actions Homelander was blamed for, there's no question he's still a monster himself. In order to take down a monster, a bigger, scarier monster is needed. Homelander's death in the show. In spite of the Amazon series and its deviations from the comics, such as the twist with Black Noir, The Boys needs to give Homelander a similarly uneventful death as well. Having gained massive amounts of fame and popularity, even as his true colors have begun to show, the version played by Anthony Starr feels just as invincible, thinking he can do no wrong. As such, the show could and should give Homelander an equally uninspiring demise, cutting right at the heart of his psychopathic self-importance. Giving him an anticlimactic death is the perfect way to defeat not just Homelander, but also his problematic followers. In the comics, Homelander isn't even in the top 3 of The Boys' villains, as he's ranking below Black Noir, Vought executive James Stillwell, and Billy Butcher himself. While he sets himself up as a terrifying threat, his death in the comics pulls the rug from under his and readers' feet by showing he's anything but a great villain. Often in pop culture, even the most repulsive villains are given cool or iconic deaths that only serve to validate their importance. The Boys comics doesn't give Homelander that kind of ending, revealing he's been playing someone else's game all along, and killing him off in a fight that only serves to establish his killer as a far more disturbing and significant villain, and I would love to see this happen in the show as well. So yeah, that's all for this video, and thanks for watching.